A good morning to you all, and a good afternoon to those who are watching in Sri Lanka. This morning we publish a report we very much hope will be consequential. We believe it should inspire the very change so many Sri Lankans have long ached and wished for. It reveals the findings of a fully fledged human rights investigation conducted for the very first time by the UN, by my office, and gives examples of the crimes perpetrated against and the suffering of tens of thousands of victims over a 9-year period. It draws us ever closer to the conclusion, to be confirmed subsequently by a court properly constituted, that war crimes and crimes against humanity, violations that are among the most serious crimes of concern to the international community as a whole, have apparently been committed by state actors, and not just state actors, but by the LTTE and other paramilitary groups as well. It is our earnest belief and hope this report will lead to efforts to end impunity for such crimes, or for these crimes, that it will create a most intense reckoning with the past, the recognition there are simply too many families throughout Sri Lanka who have suffered appallingly, too many who have disappeared, too many pushed into exile, too many funerals organized, too much pain felt, and too much lost in terms of Sri Lanka's human and economic development for the past not to be stared down, not to be learned from and atoned for. The country will never escape the stinging tentacles of its past unless victims receive justice and redress, and unless Sri Lanka can recognize its history clearly, account for it, and most importantly, change. And for a country filled with so much raw talent and passion, that challenge is not impossible. The report is divided into two parts, which are interlinked. A 19-page overarching report on promoting reconciliation, accountability, and human rights in Sri Lanka, and an accompanying 251-page report of the OHCHR investigation on Sri Lanka. They are complementary, and the shorter report, in addition to covering recent developments, provides a summary of the longer report, which covers the human rights situation and the myriad violations which took place in Sri Lanka between 2002 and 2011. I want to convey our profound gratitude to the witnesses and survivors for having come forward so bravely to share their testimony. In the years since the civil war in Sri Lanka ended, they have faced repeatedly the contempt of and even acts of intimidation from many of the authorities, not to mention the systemic denial of justice. As I said at the beginning, the report reveals patterns of grave violations, indicating that war crimes and crimes against humanity were likely committed by both sides to the conflict. The report lays bare the horrific level of violations and abuses, including the indiscriminate shelling, extrajudicial killings, and enforced disappearances. It contains harrowing accounts of torture and sexual violence. It also covers the recruitment of children by the LTTE and paramilitary groups, long-term deprivation of the liberty of hundreds of thousands of internally displaced people, denial of humanitarian assistance, and other grave crimes. Given war crimes and crimes against humanity can only be proven in a court of law, one of the most significant recommendations contained in the report is the proposed establishment of a hybrid special court, integrating international judges, prosecutors, lawyers, and investigators. I believe this is necessary for the following reasons. The report documents the years of denials and cover-ups, the failure to carry out prompt investigations, stalled investigations, and reprisals against the family members of victims and others who have advocated for justice. It shows how the repeated failure of successive domestic inquiries to bring justice has led to skepticism, anger, and a deep mistrust on the part of victims, particularly since many of the state structures allegedly responsible for the violations and crimes have remained in place. The report also demonstrates the systemic weaknesses in addressing these crimes, especially when the military or security forces were allegedly involved. It also describes reprisals against some of those who have tried to obtain justice for human rights-related cases allegedly involving state officials. I wish to state clearly here the commitment by the new government, which has undeniably taken a number of positive steps since President Maithripala Sirisena was elected last January, to pursue accountability is commendable. And you heard that commitment repeated earlier this week by the Foreign Minister, Mangala Samarawira, with whom I've had a good number of discussions in recent months, including as recently as last Sunday. However, it is, I believe, an inescapable reality that Sri Lanka's criminal justice system is not yet ready to handle these types of crimes. First and foremost, there is the absence of any reliable system for victim and witness protection. Second is the inadequacy of Sri Lanka's domestic legal framework to deal with international crimes of this gravity and scale. The third challenge is the degree to which Sri Lanka's security sector and justice system have been distorted and corrupted by decades of emergency, conflict, and impunity. It is for these reasons the establishment of a hybrid special court integrating international judges, prosecutors, lawyers, and investigators becomes so necessary. A purely domestic court procedure will simply not succeed in overcoming the widespread and justifiable suspicions fueled by decades of violations, malpractice, and broken promises. Nevertheless, the new political context in Sri Lanka is encouraging, and I believe the international community should remain engaged and support and accompany this process, including in the setting up of such a hybrid special court. Sri Lanka must also begin to dismantle the repressive structures and culture that remain deeply entrenched after decades of erosion where human rights are concerned. Finally, it is crucial, this historic opportunity for truly fundamental change, not be allowed to slip or to be overshadowed by narrow political opportunism and mutual period will perhaps provide one of the stimuli needed for a creation of a new Sri Lanka by all Sri Lankans. And I thank you for your attention and look forward to answering what questions you may have.
Okay, so Zeid, if we could take questions in batches of three, perhaps. Any takers for the first question?
Hello, Jamie Keaton from Associated Press. I was hoping that you might be able to detail as best possible the nature of this hybrid court, particularly what kind of
the recommendations that you have in this report are not followed. Is there concern, is there fear that Sri Lanka could once again fall back into conflict, into another devastating decades-long war?
Thanks. Mark Engelhardt of the EPD News Agency from Germany. Could you please outline why you advocate for a hybrid court and rather not a purely international court, or indeed the ICC?
Thank you for your questions. In respect of the hybrid court and the details that will need to be worked out, should this indeed be a recommendation that is adopted, and we sincerely hope it will be, will of course be forthcoming in terms of looking at past examples of where hybrid courts or hybrid mechanisms worked really well and where they did not. And so it would be premature to establish exactly in detail what the working arrangements would be. But clearly there has to be a well-integrated international component. The exact composition of the judges and their roles at various stages of the judicial procedure that will be that will have to be put in place will come at a later time. In respect of the recommendations not being followed, is there a fear that the country could lapse into what could be a sort of continuation of a recurrent pattern? I think clearly yes. We believe unless impunity is ended and there is a reckoning of the past, the full dimensions of what this report purports to reveal, then the fear is that they may well lapse. Now, there have been commitments made to establishing a new set of institutions that will deal with truth-telling, but this must be complemented by an accountability mechanism with the participation support of the international community. And this, I think, has to be done if we are to place the victims of all the alleged crimes at the center of our discussion. In terms of the why it is we've recommended a hybrid and not a referral to the ICC. The hybrid mechanism, I think, will sort of deepen the national involvement, at the same time maintain the international focus on Sri Lanka. We have to ensure that the victims feel that this is not a replay of the past, that this court, if constituted, will advance the cause of justice and the cause of the victims in the years to come. And I think we believe that this is essential. We have also made a recommendation that the government of Sri Lanka consider acceding to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. So prospectively, there is jurisdictional coverage for any crimes should they, God forbid, continue to occur into the future. And that is a recommendation that we also make. We also, I think, need to stress that my predecessor had on many occasions called for an independent international investigation, which the Human Rights Council finally mandated. And now that the political environment has changed and the government is committed to an accountability process, we believe the next stage now is to bore into the details and establish this combined hybrid mechanism. Thank you.
Nick Cumming-Bruce, New York Times. Have your investigations identified in detail individuals who are responsible for violations, for war crimes. Do you see there is sufficient basis for individual prosecutions? And is this just chain of command stuff, or are these people actually identified as perpetrating particular abuses?
Stephanie, any other questions?
Hi, Nina Larson, AFP. I was wondering which hybrid courts, previous hybrid courts you'd like to see used as an example for the one in Sri Lanka, and also what role would the national play? I mean, you've talked about international judges and prosecutors. What role would the national authorities play? Thanks.
Yeah, Stephanie Nebehay, Reuters. Mr. High Commissioner, can you say, following up on my colleague's question, whether you believe that people closely associated with President Rajapaksa, including his brother, the defense minister, should be among the individuals who should be potentially looked at for possible prosecutions for their involvement? And also, as a corollary, whether there are people still in the government, high-ranking or other, whom you would like, whom you think should be at least removed from office pending investigations about their wartime role.
Okay. Again, thank you for the questions. In response to the first question regarding individual culpability, it has to be borne in mind that this was a human rights investigation. And for almost the entire length of the investigation, we did not enjoy the support of the Sri Lankan authorities. Quite the contrary. All along the process, we were hampered by an inability to access the very people we needed to meet most in Sri Lanka, the victims who still remain in Sri Lanka, and there are of course many, the records, those who were close to the centers of decision making, that we had no access to. We had access, of course, to many witnesses outside the country, and as you've seen from other commissions of inquiry, whether they be independent or investigations led by my office, has not inhibited us from piecing together what we believe is a credible basis to suggest that crimes of interest to the international community, i.e. international crimes, have been committed. But one has to bear in mind that this is, again, a human rights investigation. And as was pointed out in a subsequent question raised, a follow-up criminal investigation will be required to then join up the picture more fully, to establish the linkage evidence more firmly, and to identify individual criminal responsibility more clearly. And this is the work that will need to be forthcoming. In terms of which hybrid courts are we, or examples of hybrid courts are we looking at, and is there sort of a specific example that we could use? I think for the first point we need to make is that in terms of Sri Lanka itself, previous mechanisms set up were almost designed to fail. And we have to design a mechanism along with the Sri Lankan authorities such that it succeeds. It would be premature at this point to suggest exactly the models or the formulations, but we will hopefully, once we sort of have this discussion, now that the report is released, with the authorities of Sri Lanka, be able to flesh out the details and then come back to you with a more detailed picture of what cited names in this report because we believe that we were looking at the broader sort of patterns that suggest organization and planning, and clearly then breach the threshold of what separates an ordinary crime from a crime of concern to the international community, i.e. war crimes and crimes against humanity. We believe it will be the task and the undertaking of a subsequent criminal investigation to then establish, as I said earlier, individual criminal accountability. But clearly, once you read the report, it is clear that the organization and planning was apparent in the commission of many of these crimes.
Thank you, High Commissioner. Gabriela Sotomayor from Mexican News Agency. Victims have been waiting for so long, so my question is if you have in mind a time frame when this court should be established. Who will decide this? And my second question is if you think that victims from other conflicts in the world should have hope that justice can be done?
The matter of, sorry, shall I answer the question? The matter of time frame is an important matter because clearly there will have to be a period of consultations, I think, both within Sri Lanka and then with the international community. But those consultations cannot be endless, and there has to be a sense of purpose, and for the sake, as you said, of honoring and dignifying the suffering of those who've been at the receiving end of the commission of crimes. Yes, it would have to, this has to be work that is done purposefully and done with a sense of urgency, but also with the requisite consultative process in place. And you raise a very interesting second question about the expectations of victims worldwide. And perhaps this should be the subject of a subsequent press conference, because clearly the progress of international criminal law, the implementation of international criminal law is both harder than we perhaps initially anticipated when the Rome Statute was agreed to in 1998, establishing the International Criminal Court, and yet not without its surprises either, wherein on occasion you will see domestic processes working in conjunction with regional pressures to produce the start of an outcome, and we see the trial of the former president of Chad, of course, as an example of that. So we always retain hope that victims will find redress by dint of the unacceptability, the fact that we have to reject the continuation of a sense of impunity for crimes committed on this gravity, or with this gravity and scale in mind. I mean, we have to end this impunity that exists. And so I hope that Sri Lanka is now so well placed to carve and chart out a new path for itself, and thereby set an example for other countries. And yes, as a consequence, hopefully other victims in other countries will likewise see justice done to them. Thank you.
Darisha from the Daily FT in Sri Lanka. High Commissioner, I would just like to know if your office would be urging that the recommendation for the hybrid court with international judges and independent prosecutors be included in the draft resolution on Sri Lanka at the end of the HRC session?
Yes, no. I, of course, will expect that there will be a careful reading of the report, the shorter summary, and the longer report in the next few days. And my hope is that the Human Rights Council will endorse the recommendations that we have placed in our report. And given that we haven't had consultations on the draft, or whatever draft exists as yet, again, it would be premature to give you any indication of where we are in that discussion. It is a discussion to come, and perhaps at a later juncture throughout this session we will let you know where we stand on this. But our hope is that the recommendations will be accepted and adopted by principally, really, it's the government of Sri Lanka, but the Human Rights Council will see fit to support the recommendations, yes. Thank you.
Sorry, one more question. In your discussions, I mean, the report recommends setting up a fully fledged OHCHR office in Sri Lanka. In the discussions you've had with the Foreign Minister recently and other government officials, has there been any indication, willingness on their side to accept that?
This is a discussion that has to yet materialize, not in any discussions with me. Certainly we did not discuss this. Although I had cordial discussions with the Foreign Minister on a number of occasions, as all of you know, there was no U-turn in the support that we had hoped would be extended to the investigation. Although, again, much of the tone and some of the decisions that the current President and the government have taken clearly point to in a positive direction, but as we all know too, much more still needs to be done. And this will be an issue which we will discuss with the Sri Lankan authorities. We clearly believe that we should have a role in assisting and supporting and providing examples of other situations which they may want to consider. And clearly when it comes to setting up the hybrid court, I think we hope that we could be of great assistance. It has to be a court that will meet the expectations of victims and the international community alike, of course, as well as then propel Sri Lanka into a new future where impunity is not evident everywhere.
Sorry, just to follow up on that, just to be clear, you're saying that there was no additional assistance to the investigation after the elections in January, that the new government didn't provide didn't respond to any of your requests at that time?
There was a different atmosphere, certainly. I mean, when you compare the public exchanges that we had with the previous government, which were often bitter and filled with accusation, the atmosphere was very different. But it was also clear that we were not going to see a drastic change when it came to supporting the investigation outright. So for the most part, we did not have access to the sorts of information which could have filled certain parts of the report. For example, you may well ask me, why have we not been more specific on numbers? I mean, clearly, if we had access to some of the records in Sri Lanka, this is something that we perhaps could have opined on with greater clarity. And again, this is not perhaps unusual when you come when you look at so many of the investigations we conduct, and for that reason we need to then have follow-up investigations, intensive investigations, but in the right atmosphere with the requisite guarantees when it comes to witness and victim protection in due course, and also having the right framework so that you can exercise jurisdiction over these crimes. In other words, the offenses under crimes against humanity would have to be criminalized and placed into law. So these are measures that will have to be taken, and it's all evident in our report that these are the steps required.
I was wondering if anything in this shocking report was particularly shocking to you, and if your investigators found that violations, abuse increased during the waning days of the war. There were reports of 40,000 civilians, Tamil civilians, being killed, even though many of them were in protected zones. Did you corroborate that? And did you find that most crimes were committed by the security forces, or were the Tamil Tigers still committing crimes as well?
Yeah, the report, I think, is rather unique, not simply because it was the first fully fledged UN report that covers a 9-year period, and not just looking at a fixed number of months during the apex of the conflict. And it is the diversity in terms of the crimes allegedly committed and the severity of them that was really quite astonishing. I did mention that the crimes of a sexual nature, I think, made harrowing reading, and you will see this for yourselves once you read the report yourselves. I think most Sri Lankans, most who want to realize, given after all that so many families have suffered for so long over the decades, realize that much was not right with the way that the state dealt with some of its internal problems. This report will not be earth-shattering in terms of its revelations where many in Sri Lanka are concerned. What it will do, though, is it provides focus and clarity in a way that no previous UN report of this scale has done. And we believe will create a good foundation for a subsequent criminal investigation then to proceed on this basis. There is a lot of analysis that's still required, and that will come at a later stage.
Thanks. You mentioned the possibility of crimes against humanity and of war crimes. Is there any indication in the investigation of a purported genocide?
No. That is not something that we perceive at this stage. Had we thought that acts of genocide had been committed, of course we would have raised this in the findings. That is not to say that at a subsequent stage, once investigations were conducted, that is implausible. But for the time being, it is not something that we perceive as having allegedly happened.
I think Stephanie was next.
All right. Yeah, I was just wondering, you recommend a vetting process for officials, police, and whatnot. How many people do you expect would be implicated or affected by that?
Yeah. Yes, we do recommend vetting for security and military officials. I think it is absolutely clear, given the findings in this report, that there must be a great deal of soul searching that needs to take place if Sri Lanka is going to ensure a non-recurrence. And as I said, this hopefully will come through a combination of different initiatives coming together. But one would hope also within the security services there will be a recognition that these methods, were they to be proven in a court of law as having taken place, do not lead or do not bring greater stability to a country. It only brings greater suffering. It only creates more victims. It only creates more long-term doubt about the stability of a particular country. And so we hope that in this process of national soul-searching, which we hope will continue or take place at a deeper level, that the security services will understand that there must be a sort of reckoning with the past and there must be accountability. Yeah.
This time, definitely, Stephanie.
Yeah.
No? Any final questions?
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry. Yes, the report, as quoted here in the press statement, says that the government could not, hasn't got the means to do an investigation itself. Now the question is, if the Sri Lankan government is not able to do that, we've got in this current council a recommendation for an international commission of inquiry on Yemen, and the government of Yemen is suggesting that they want to do it themselves. So what is the situation in Sri Lanka? The report says they're not ready. What is the situation, a warlike situation which is ongoing, to do something similar?
Yeah, no, we perhaps need to have another discussion on Yemen at a certain point in time. It is clear in our report that we suggested there be an international mechanism put in place. The Yemenis have set up, are willing to set up, have indicated to us that they're going to set up a national mechanism, and we don't see them as mutually exclusive in the case of Yemen, and this we have welcomed, and I welcomed it in my statement 2 days ago. But in respect of Sri Lanka, and given as I said, and as we've said in the report, the many previous failed attempts to deal with the question of impunity, the victims of past alleged crimes will not find any solace in a purely domestic mechanism where you don't have the underlying legislative basis at the moment to exercise jurisdiction over crimes against humanity and war crimes. And so there are a number of steps required. As I said, we believe this to be a juncture where, if in combination with the positive expressions that we've heard on the part of the President and his government regarding the future of the country, and then together with our report, we can move toward establishing a hybrid special court, I think we will be on the right trajectory in respect of Sri Lanka. But I wanted to thank all of you for attending this press conference. Naturally, there will be questions that we will have to come back to you at a later juncture in terms of supplying you with the answers. So I hope you will bear with us, and thank you very much for your attention.